My HOA president said my lawn was a violation. The next day, I found my daughter bleeding on the floor. The camera lingers on the speaker's face, their eyes red with sleeplessness. The trembling in their voice is real. A pause follows, heavy enough that the viewer almost wonders if the video will cut off. Then, with a deep breath, the speaker steadies themselves and continues. You're probably thinking this is another Karen neighbor story about grass length, right? Another petty dispute about whether the grass was too tall or whether a flower bed was allowed. But what if I told you that HOAs have legally fined people for removing poison ivy from their own property? That they've punished parents for trying to make their yards safe for their kids? My story isn't just about grass. It's about power. It's about health. And it's about what happens when an organization designed to protect property values ends up threatening actual lives. The scene cuts to black and white footage of suburban developments from the 1960s. Cookie-cutter homes, wide cul-de-sacs, kids on bicycles. On the surface, it looks like the American dream, but the narrator's voice makes it clear there's a darker undercurrent. Here's something they don't teach you in school. HOAs, or homeowners associations, originated in 1960s America. The idea was simple: create a neighborhood, keep it looking uniform, and supposedly protect everyone's property value. But what started as a well-meaning idea has become something far more dangerous. Today, HOAs wield a kind of power that would make colonial governors blush. They can fine you, sue you, even take your home. And in my case, their obsession with appearances ended with my daughter in the hospital. The narrator's tone shifts, less nostalgic, more cutting. HOAs aren't just rule enforcers, they're mini governments, operating without the checks and balances we expect from actual government. They call themselves neighbors, but they act like rulers. They say they protect property values, but more often they're protecting their own sense of control. The speaker holds up a crumpled violation notice. The paper shakes in their hand, whether from anger or exhaustion is unclear. The camera zooms in on the notice, the words "unapproved lawn alteration" stamped in bold red ink. My violation? The speaker continues. I replaced toxic pesticides with a clover lawn. Clover, a harmless, eco-friendly ground cover that doesn't trigger my toddler's allergies. My daughter has always been sensitive. Red patches from grass, constant sneezing, rashes that just wouldn't go away. I thought clover was the solution. It was softer, safer, and required no chemicals. But the HOA didn't see safety. They saw defiance. They threatened me with daily fines, $200 a day, until I ripped it out. The camera cuts to a reenactment. A parent crouching in their yard, scattering clover seeds with a hopeful smile. A little girl runs barefoot through the green, giggling. Then the scene hard cuts to a close-up of a mailbox. A letter slams inside, the words "violation notice" stamped across the envelope. The narrator continues. The irony? Studies show that clover lawns reduce erosion better than traditional grass. They stay green with less water, they attract pollinators, they even help the soil. But none of that mattered. To the HOA, I wasn't a parent protecting my kid. I was a problem, a violator. They weren't protecting property values, they were flexing power. The music intensifies. The reenactment shows a parent anxiously pacing in their kitchen, a pile of violation letters growing on the table. A phone rings. They answer it, their face collapsing in frustration, as a stern voice on the other end says, "Failure to comply will result in further penalties, including legal action." The camera lingers on the child, sitting nearby, coughing as she colors in a notebook. The speaker's voice cracks as they continue. But here's where the story takes a turn. The bleeding wasn't some dramatic exaggeration. It was real. My daughter stumbled on a broken sprinkler head, one the HOA had refused to fix. It was sticking out of the grass in the common area, jagged metal waiting like a trap. She tripped, the sharp edge tore into her knee. One moment she was running, the next she was screaming. Blood covered her leg. I scooped her up, rushed it to the car, and drove straight to the ER. The camera cuts to a dramatization. A little girl lying on the ground, her hands clutching her knee, crying in pain. The parent's frantic voice calls out, "Stay with me, baby, stay with me." The screen fades to the sterile, harsh lights of a hospital. A doctor leans over the child, stitching her wound. The sound of her cries echoes in the background. The narrator's voice grows tighter, heavier. The ER bill? $3,000. $3,000. And when I called the HOA, their response wasn't apology, it wasn't concern, it was bureaucracy. They told me to submit a repair request form. Like my child's blood was just another line item on their maintenance checklist. A graphic fills the screen with CDC data. 2.8 million children visit the ER every year due to falls injuries. Millions of children end up in the ER every year from falls, many of them preventable. But HOAs don't prioritize safety. Their budgets prioritize appearances. Pools, landscaping, tennis courts, anything that looks good in a brochure. But safety? That's always an afterthought. Until it isn't. Until someone's child is bleeding on the floor. The music takes a darker turn. The text, Reason 3, appears on screen. Most homeowners sign HOA contracts without realizing what they're giving up. Buried in those endless pages of fine print are clauses that strip away rights you didn't even know you had. They can place liens on your home for unpaid fines. They can dictate what medical equipment you can or can't have. Yes, even ramps for disabled residents. And in 28 states, they can foreclose on your house faster than a bank can. The reenactment shows a parent flipping through pages of legal documents, their eyes wide in disbelief. The words lien notice flash across the screen in bold letters. The speaker's voice lowers to a whisper. When my daughter was injured, I thought they'd take responsibility. But the HOA's lawyer responded with a single sentence. This is unfortunate, but not our liability. They weren't protecting families, they were protecting themselves. The video cuts back to the speaker, holding the violation notice in one hand and the hospital bill in the other. Their voice rises, raw and furious. So the next time someone says, just follow the rules, remember this. My daughter's stitches cost less than their lawn fine. Maybe, just maybe, we should start violating outdated rules more often. The music swells. The screen fades to black, leaving only white text. Share if your HOA prioritizes grass over kids. The screen fades back in, the atmosphere heavier now. The speaker sits at their dining room table, surrounded by piles of documents. Violation notices, HOA bylaws, hospital discharge papers, and invoices scattered like the wreckage of a life slowly coming undone. The camera zooms closer to their face. They look exhausted. Shadows under their eyes suggest days without rest. Their hands tremble as they flip through the papers. Do you know what an HOA likes to call itself? A community. But what kind of community punishes parents for protecting their kids? What kind of community threatens to take your home if you don't bend to their will? They lift one paper and read aloud, failure to comply will result in further penalties, including potential foreclosure. Foreclosure. Over Clover. The line lands like a gut punch. The music drops, replaced by the faint sound of a ticking clock. The narrator leans forward, staring directly into the lens. I'm not exaggerating. Across the US, families have lost their homes for things as small as a missed paint deadline or a $200 fine. One man in Texas lost his house worth over $300,000 because he underpaid his dues by $8. $8! And these aren't rare stories, they're patterns. They're happening in nearly every state, in neighborhoods just like yours. The screen flashes with real headlines. Family loses home over $150 HOA fine. HOA forecloses on a veteran's house during deployment. Disabled woman ordered to remove wheelchair ramp. The images blurred together until they fade back to the speaker's face. The camera shifts to a slow pan across rows of identical houses. White siding, trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes. The kind of neighborhood that looks perfect from a drone shot. But what the narrator's voice cuts through. HOA boards aren't made of experts. They're made of neighbors, retirees with too much time on their hands, power-hungry individuals who love the feeling of control, people who might smile at you on the sidewalk but secretly write your name on the violation list. They don't see people. They see infractions. They don't care if your child is sick, if your spouse lost their job, or if you're struggling to make ends meet. They care about paint swatches, fence heights, and whether your flowers are approved. The speaker exhales slowly, his voice almost shaking. The night after my daughter's accident, I sat at this very table with her hospital bracelet still around my wrist. I read the violation letters again and again, and something inside me snapped. because it wasn't just about grass anymore. It was about the principle. My child's safety was less important to them than an imaginary standard of beauty. A flashback reenactment plays, the parent slamming a stack of violation letters onto the table, knocking over a coffee mug. The liquid spreads like a stain across the paper, blurring the word violation. I decided I wasn't going to be silent. I wasn't going to keep paying their blood money fines while they ignored broken sprinklers and dangerous walkways. If they wanted a fight, I was ready to give them one. The music swells with determination. The camera cuts to a crowded community center, folding chairs, a long table where HOA board members sit stiffly, papers stacked in front of them. The air feels thick, the kind of environment where voices echo too loudly. The reenactment shows the parent walking in, hospital paperwork in hand. Her daughter sits at home with a bandaged knee,
her crutches leaning against the couch. I thought if I showed them the medical bills, the pictures of my daughter's injury, maybe they'd understand. Maybe they'd realize this wasn't about landscaping. This was about negligence. But when I finished speaking, the president of the HOA leaned forward and said, "We're very sorry for your situation, but rules are rules." The reenactment freezes on the smug face of the HOA president. The words echo in distorted sound. Rules are rules. Rules are rules. The speaker's voice cuts in, sharp and furious. Rules are rules? Rules didn't stop my daughter from bleeding. Rules didn't pay her medical bill. Rules didn't fix the sprinkler. Rules didn't protect anyone. Rules protected them, that's all. The video cuts to footage of suburban streets across America. Drone shots, cul-de-sacs, neatly trimmed lawns. Here's what you need to know. HOAs aren't just neighborhood clubs, they're billion-dollar industries. Together, they manage more than $100 billion in assets nationwide. They have lobbyists, they influence state laws, and they don't want you to question their authority. Because if enough of us did, their entire system would collapse. The screen fills with numbers. 74 million Americans live under HOAs. More than 355,000 HOA communities exist in the U.S.
HOAs collect over $96 billion annually. That's not community. That's control. That's profit. And when profit comes before people, children bleed on the floor while boards debate grass height. The screen shows blurred out faces of different families. Their voices overlap in whispers. We lost our home over $500. They told me I couldn't put up a wheelchair ramp. I got fined for leaving my trash bin out one day too long. The narrator: you don't hear these stories because most people are too afraid to speak out. HOAs can retaliate. They can fine you more. They can drag you into court. They can make your life hell until you either pay up or move out. And that fear keeps most people quiet. The camera cuts back to the speaker. Their eyes glisten, but they don't cry. Their voice is steady, heavy with resolve. But I'm not quiet anymore. The music builds to a crescendo. The screen shows the bandaged leg of the child, the unpaid bills, the violation letters. So here's my message. If you live under an HOA, start reading every line of your contract. Start questioning every rule. Start documenting everything they do. And if they try to punish you for protecting your family, don't be silent. Don't be afraid, because rules aren't sacred. People are. Children are. Families are. And no board meeting, no bylaw, no violation letter should ever come before that. The video cuts to black. White text appears. This isn't just about lawns. This is about lives. Then the final words from the speaker. Voice calm, but resolute. My daughter still has a scar on her knee. Every time I see it, I'm reminded of one thing. Grass grows back. Children don't. The screen fades to black. The war begins. After that meeting, I thought maybe they'd back off. I thought maybe showing them my daughter's injury would shake something loose inside their conscience. But I was wrong. That meeting wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning of war. The screen flashes to another envelope sliding under the front door. Another violation notice. This time not just for the grass. Improper trash can placement. Unauthorized garden decoration. Failure to repaint mailbox. The reenactment shows the parent holding the papers in disbelief. The camera zooms on their trembling hands. They started piling on violations, weekly, sometimes daily. My mailbox, which had been the same color for years, was suddenly a problem. A small garden gnome my daughter had painted in art class? Unapproved decoration. Even my trash cans, because one time, just one time, I brought them in a few hours late. Every rule they could twist, they twisted. Every weapon they had, they used. The music grows darker, a low rumble like an approaching storm. The narrator continues. This is how HOAs operate. If you question them, if you stand up, they don't negotiate. They retaliate. They send letters, they add fines, they threaten liens. And it doesn't matter if you're right, because they have the power and they know most people don't have the money to fight back in court. On screen, a family sitting around a kitchen table, heads in hands, paper scattered. A single mom reading a fine notice while her children eat cereal. A veteran in a wheelchair staring at a foreclosure letter. These aren't isolated incidents. These are patterns. Across America, thousands of families are silenced not by reason, but by fear. Because an HOA doesn't just fine you, they can take your home. They can erase everything you've worked for, and they can do it legally. The reenactment shows the parent late at night pacing the living room. Their daughter sleeps on the couch, crutches nearby. A pile of unopened violation letters sits on the table. I knew I couldn't keep up. The fines were stacking higher than my mortgage payment, and every time I paid one, another appeared. It wasn't about compliance anymore. It was about control, about breaking me down until I either sold my house or submitted completely. And I wasn't about to do either. The music shifts, no longer despairing, but tense, investigative. The parent begins digging through HOA bylaws. Highlighters mark pages. Sticky notes fill the table. They Google late into the night. I started researching HOAs, their power, their limits, their history. And what I found made me sick. The screen shows newspaper clippings, highlighted quotes, historical footage. Modern HOA started in the 1960s, backed by real estate developers and government incentives. HOAs now control more than 70% of new housing developments. Courts often side with HOAs because they're considered private contracts. Do you understand what that means? It means when you sign that dotted line at closing, you're not just buying a house, you're signing away your rights, your freedom of choice, even your freedom of speech. Because if you speak out, they can call it disruptive. They can fine you for attending a meeting too loudly. They can silence you with the stroke of a pen. The reenactment shows the parents slamming a bylaw book shut, disgusted. But here's the thing HOAs never count on. They think fear will keep everyone silent. They think neighbors won't unite because everyone's too scared of retaliation. But sometimes, it all takes is one person saying enough. The parent starts knocking on doors, one by one. A young couple whispers that they too were fined for a cracked driveway. An older man shows his notice for an unauthorized flag. A mother reveals her autistic son's sensory play equipment had to be removed. One by one, the neighbors begin to talk, begin to share, begin to realize they're not alone. The music swells with hope, overlaid with the sound of voices rising. Cut to a dimly lit meeting room. The HOA board sits stiffly, but this time, the seats behind them are filled. Dozens of neighbors, parents, veterans, seniors. The parent stands at the microphone, papers in hand. This isn't just about me, they say firmly. This is about every single family you've punished,
Every fine you've handed out while ignoring real safety issues. Every neighbor you've threatened with foreclosure. We're done being silent. The board members shift uncomfortably. The president clears a throat, trying to regain control. This is not the appropriate forum. But the crowd erupts. No more fines, someone yells. You ignored our safety, another shouts. You work for us, not against us. The room fills with noise, the voices of a community that's finally had enough. The reenactment grows intense, almost cinematic. The parent lays down photos, the broken sprinkler, the daughter's injury, the outrageous fine letters. You talk about rules, they say sharply, but rules don't mean anything if they don't protect people. We trusted you to care for this community. Instead, you exploited it, and now we're taking it back. The neighbors cheer, banging on tables. The president tries to gavel the room into silence, but her voice is drowned out. For the first time, the power dynamic shifts. The camera zooms on her face, pale and shaken. The screen fades to a slower montage. The broken sprinkler finally repaired. Neighbors gathering on lawns, talking openly without fear. A notice posted. New HOA elections coming soon. The narrator's voice softens. We didn't win everything that night, but we cracked their armor. We reminded them they answered to us, not the other way around. And for the first time in years, people weren't afraid. They were angry, and they were united. The camera cuts back to the speaker at their dining room table. This time, they don't look broken, they look determined. HOAs want you to believe you're powerless. They want you to believe you're alone, but you're not. The moment you stand together, the moment you demand accountability, they lose their grip. Because an HOA is nothing without the people it governs. The music swells into a hopeful crescendo. My daughter still has her scar, and every time I see it, I'm reminded of one thing. Grass grows back. Children don't. The screen fades to black. White text appears. This isn't just a story. This is a warning.